I would like to introduce the next speaker, Professor Axel Mühlbacher, Professor of Health Economics and Healthcare Management at Hochschule Neubrandenburg in Germany. As a second appointment, he is adjunct professor at the Duke Department of Population Health Sciences, and he is a research fellow in the Center for Health Policy and Inequalities Research at the Duke Global Health Institute in the US. He has a number of other commitments in other bodies. He serves as associate editor of Value in Health on the Journal of Choice Modeling, and he has worked a lot on patient-centered outcomes research, and I'm very pleased that he is here and will take us through his talk. Welcome, Axel. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thanks for your invitation. I'm very honored to present, and I'm very happy to present some of the arguments. David put it very nicely. I just have one remark. I'm not a clinician. I'm not a pharmacist. I'm not a biologist. I'm an economist, and that's where I come from. I was always perfectly introduced. I'm working in Germany at the Hochschule Neubrandenburg. In the US, I have an adjunct professorship at Duke. And one of my most favorite jobs is I'm chairing the International Academy of Health Preference Research. And from this institution, from this organization, I'm driven by explaining how and why to use preference research, and especially patient preferences. And I would like to start with a vision. And it's a very easy vision because it just shows you an efficiency frontier. It's not important that this is one of the decision-making rules. If there's a cost-benefit or cost-effectiveness analysis in Germany, you can transform this to every decision rule which is being used, if it adheres to a certain algorithm and if it is transparent. So in order to come up with an idea how much something can cost, the logic shows you that you have to measure the cost, which honestly, that's the easiest part, and you have to measure the benefit. And only if you have costs and benefit of a certain compound, drug, or technology, you sort of can plot certain dots, alternatives in that framework. And once you have different angles, once you have different alternatives plotted according to their benefits and costs, then you can draw something like a threshold. And please don't be confused. That threshold can be within an efficiency frontier. It can be within the quality framework. It's pretty much the willingness to pay. So the steepness of that threshold, the steepness of these curves, tells us everything about the prices we are willing to pay for a certain drug, technology, product, etc. And we might have ideas, how to pay for certain drugs in the future. And that's when we certainly have to look in the future and extrapolate one of these thresholds. So the question is, how are you measuring cost? How are you plotting these thresholds, which is basically a societal willingness to pay? And the last question is, how are we going to plot benefits? And that's why I started my talk, because usually these frameworks are being sold by just putting up these visions of how to do it. And the background to these benefits is not being explained. It's not very well explained if we use a quality approach and we look at a utility existing of quality of life, and it's certainly not well explained if we look at the efficiency frontier, which is the basis of the German healthcare system. So why is value assessment necessary? Very easy answer. We got to pick a price for a certain drug. To put this into perspective, we had to pick a certain price for vaccines, for the COVID vaccines. It could have been 50 per shot, it could have been 15 per shot, maybe 100. But what's going to happen if we pick the wrong prices? If the prices are too high, we're wasting money. And wasting money is not just a word. We're arguing with opportunity cost here. Every time we're wasting money, we're allocating money somewhere where it doesn't help instead of putting it to another place where it actually can be of help. So if the prices are too high, money, resources, time of people necessary is just being wasted because we spend it at the wrong place. If the prices are too low, we pretty much just build innovation barriers. If prices are too low, nobody is going to invest time, resources, and money to the development of certain drugs, compounds, etc. And we got very close to this argument while we discussed the COVID-19 vaccines. We were very close to discussing this over the last 20, 30 years. Question is, how we're going to put up these value assessment frameworks, because what we are looking at is the question, what is the right price? If we don't hit that right price, it's either waste or a barrier of innovations. So the question is, why is patient reference information so important? Why should we listen to patient preferences? Why should we incorporate the perspective, the needs and wants of the people confronted with a certain disease? Well, usually we delegate these decisions. We delegate approval decisions, we delegate reimbursement decisions, we delegate pricing decisions, and we even delegate the utilization of certain drugs and compounds and technologies and products. And there's a reason for it. We're delegating these decisions because there are experts which are better informed. There are experts which we trust that they're going to find the best solution for us as individuals or as citizens. The question is, every time these experts make decisions, they have to weigh the benefits and risks. Every time a drug, a technology is being approved, somebody or a group of people is weighing benefits and risks. It's not us as citizens, it's this small group. Question is it transparent? And what are they taking into account? And my point is, we have to separate the delegation and discuss what kind of rights we're actually delegating. Because my point of view is that these people making decisions for society and individual patients have to keep in mind that these decisions are being delegated. And I'm not willing to give up that these decisions are being made based on my value judgments as a citizen and patient, and not on a value judgment which is subjective and maybe not even transparent. And that comes, and here I come to maybe a very offensive remark, because the measuring of patient endpoints, clinical evidence is necessary, but it is not sufficient for decision making. Clinical evidence is necessary, and we got to put in a lot of effort to measure clinical effects the right way based on gold standards and looking at causality. But even if they're perfectly measured, there's no way to inform these value judgments. And please forgive me a little joke. If you watch My Haircut and Harry's later on, do you want to depend on our value judgment as experts on the value of hair? Well, you might have a different perspective. Losing hair can be bad, But if we both would be on these on these panels, well, probably we wouldn't value hair as high as my presenters. And that just gives you a little impression on how important these patient preferences are. And they have further impacts. They have impacts on patient experience. They do have impact on compliance, and they certainly do have impact on adherence. So where do we need these patient preference information? Is there a place? Is it just a very small part? Well, I just plotted a process from R&D until post-approval, and I'm just going to pick out certain times where patient preference information can be very valuable for the people who make decisions within these processes or steps. So if you look at R&D, and if we for example, take a target product profile, which is actually looking at the effects, the ones which are favored, the ones which are unfavored, and is written and precisely documented how a certain compound is being moved forward. Well, the question is, what are actually the indications, value drivers? We know about the disease, we know about the indication, we know about the traditional or the status quo on treatments, but what is actually a value driver for patients? And that's something which can be elicited or extracted from patient preference information. If we're in phase 1, we're looking at administration. Well, there are quite some discussions on how certain ways of administering a compound to a patient is impacting patient's value or not. So just take a very basic example, tablet versus injection. There are certainly differences on how a patient is being treated with these different types of administration of a compound. Phase 2, phase 3, if it comes to efficacy, safety, there it's actually happening where these very impactful value judgments are being made about benefits and risks. And the question is, are these benefits and risks being weighted, being valued or appraised by experts? And then the question is, are these experts informed about the patient preferences, which are necessary to come up with an overall perspective on value? And that data actually can help to forecast. This type of research is being used to forecast demand. This type of research is being used to forecast behavior. And even the knowledge about the decision-making framework would be helpful to help the persons affected by a certain disease to make decisions about their life and about their quality of life. So to round this up, it's not only one stage and one study which can be used along the research and innovation process. It's pretty much in every step where we need the information of patients. And here's a more precise example on oncology. And I tried to very neatly try to come up with endpoints being used to value the success of a certain treatment versus another treatment within a comparative effectiveness research setting. And we do have quality of life, we have disease-free survival, we have remission, we have overall survival, and all these endpoints develop over time. Once a patient is moving on, getting his diagnosis, therapy, relapse, therapy changes, relapse again, and maybe all the way up to palliative care. Question is, what is the most important endpoint? How are patients valuing these endpoints? Is it really important to look at remission? Can we make fruitful decisions for patients if we only look at remission or disease-free survival? And I'm just going to pick out a very precise one. If we have progression-free survival and we do not have overall survival, and we know that progression-free survival does not impact overall survival, is it still a valuable endpoint to make decisions? Is it still contributing to patients' perspective of their disease? And on the downside here, you see the risks, side effects, and time to treatment failure, all of these things. We need to have a clearer picture on how this affects patients. And I would like to address two buzzwords. One's a value assessment framework, and the other one is health reference research. And the basic statement I would like to make, without showing you that this actually works, is we got the methods in place. We got a large group of researchers who are looking at these methods, and we're willing and happy to move these methods forward. So, for example, with a value assessment framework, which is basically a transparent structure of modifying information towards metrics which help us to make decisions on effectiveness or efficacy, which help us to align comparative effectiveness with certain scales expressing value to patients, or even efficiency, and that's how I started. We do know how to deal with the data in scoring, the identification and weighting of that data. There are several books already being written, which we can take a look at. So the pretty much the libraries are full, and we can use that knowledge. Second, to health reference research, which is younger. It's a discipline growing over the last 20, 25 years. Started out in different other disciplines than health economics or health services research. But for the last 15, 20 years, it's extensively being researched and used. And it's pretty much about decomposing a decision problem, setting up decision models where patients can choose between different alternatives. And that data, which is being extracted by these choices, that is very helpful to come up with a statistical model based on a regression analysis, showing us how certain aspects, how certain attributes, characteristics of a treatment impact the value from a patient's point of view. I'm very sorry, I'm not moving further. If you would like to have some literature, I'm more than happy to send you the literature. I'm just going to show you a hypothetical example, and that's very easy. It's an oncology case, and it's a decision model which is built on the assumption that time to progression and overall survival is very important. The response to treatment is important, fatigue, risk of infection. And we can capture this in a decision model. We can do the studies. And I only would like if you pay attention to this one here. So the question always was, does overall survival and time to progression can be used together, or can time to progression be a valuable insight to value of a certain intervention? Well, that's a very easy answer, and I'm not trying to prove that it's the right thing. Here, it shows that the curve, the value curve, the preference curve of a higher progression-free survival actually is always on top of a lower a progression-free survival independent of the overall survival. So the progression-free survival is important, even if it's not impacting the overall survival. At least that's what this kind of reference information would show you. Here, just a very short glimpse. That's the same data, and I don't want to convince you that the data is right. I want to show you what you can do. It shows you 4 classes of patients. And you can see that what I showed you at the beginning, that progression-free survival is important, independent on the impact on overall survival, is only true for a small group. See this third group here? It's not important at all. And that group has 38% of the patient population. So we even can slice and dice the patient preference information in a way to be more insightful on heterogeneous or heterogeneity within patient populations. The summary, or what's the future research? Well, the advantages of value assessment frameworks and health preference research is that it's based in a theoretic framework. It does have a utility theoretic foundation. It can be adapted to quite a lot of decisions. It's being used in different free fields of research, not only health. You can research policy interventions, therapeutics, and products, and it's consistent. It's with the cognitive abilities of patients most of the times. The limitations, well, to the study I showed you here, it does have some problems with hypothetical bias, which means people are not in the real situations once we ask them to make these decisions. It's complex to build these studies. It's even, we had a meeting with the FDA, somebody said it's a Cadillac method. I just would like to put it this way. If you spend 1% of the money which is being invested in clinical research, you can have a lot of patient preference information on the table for that money. And I think it makes sense to spend 1% of the money invested in clinical research to make sense of clinical data. And one of the problems is it needs a wide range of skills, and that's not a self-advertisement. I'm struggling each day to understand these methods if they come from different disciplines. Thank you very much. I hope I could give you a short glimpse on how these methodological backgrounds are. Sorry if it was short on some of the parts. I'm happy to send you some literature.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Axel, for your talk. That was really inspiring, and also thanks a lot, Anne, first of all, that you are here, and also for your talk.